$8 million in gold. One man, one moment that changes everything. Dave Turin has just uncovered one of the most staggering gold hauls Alaska's wildlands have ever given up. And if you're not watching this, you're about to miss history being made. This isn't some dusty mining story from the past. It's happening right now. The size, the purity, the location. All of it is sending shockwaves through the gold mining world. Rivals are panicking, insiders are whispering, and the buzz is spreading like wildfire. We're about to take you deep into the heart of this jackpot, how it happened, the risks he took, and the unbelievable scenes when the first glittering nuggets came out of the earth. But here's the thing. If you click away, you'll miss the strategies, the drama, and the inside details people will be talking about for years. Don't be the one hearing it secondhand. Hit like now, subscribe, and lock yourself in. It started like any other workday. Diesel engines roaring, gravel rattling through the plant, the metallic hum of the sluice boxes filling the air. Then, without warning, a dazzling flash caught the sunlight, bouncing back in a way no rock ever could. In the sluice, among the wet stones and swirling grit, lay a slab of gold so bright it looked almost unreal. The first test pan was heavy, too heavy, straining the wrists of the man holding it. The moment he tipped the contents into the pan, the camp seemed to change. Voices dropped to whispers, boots crunched slower on the gravel, and even the excavator's engine seemed to fade into the background. All eyes locked on that glimmering mound in the center of the pan. A voice cracked through the radio, urgent and electric. "Dave, you'd better get down here now. This is big." When Dave finally arrived, the crew parted to make way. He crouched down, scooped a handful of wet gravel, and let the water run off until only gold remained in his palm. For a long, tense moment, he just stared at it. Then, in a low voice that carried across the claim, he said, "This changes everything." The real shock wasn't just the gold. It was where they'd found it. This wasn't a known hotspot or an old claim rich with history. This was a forgotten, swampy stretch of land so tangled in roots and muck that most miners wouldn't waste an afternoon there, let alone risk a season. For decades, locals swore it was worthless, but Dave saw something others didn't. An aging, hand-drawn map from a long-dead prospector had found its way into his hands. A map marked with a single cryptic note: yellow riches in the black mud. Reaching it was its own battle. Chainsaws hacked through fallen timber, winches dragged equipment inch by inch through sucking clay, and the ground threatened to swallow more than one ATV whole. It took days before the first bucket even touched pay dirt. Every grizzled old-timer in the region had laughed at the idea. Every rival miner had written it off. But as the first gold rolled across the sluice, the laughter stopped. Dave had just turned the map's legend into reality. Once the first load was cleaned and the concentrates were spread across the table, the numbers became impossible to ignore. Ounces turned to pounds in a matter of hours. Nugget after nugget, some big enough to fill a fist, clinked into metal trays. Fine gold dust clung to every groove of the cleanup mats, so much that even the water swirling over them shimmered in the sun. Every pan seemed richer than the last. The scale ticked higher, and higher still, until even the crew stopped trying to calculate the total. Early estimates, whispered with the kind of awe you only hear once in a career, put the haul at $8 million. And that was just from the surface layers. Off to the side, geologists were already murmuring among themselves. The density, the purity, the distribution, it all pointed to a mother lode buried deeper still. Word of the numbers spread through camp like wildfire. Men who had been slogging through 16-hour shifts in ankle-deep mud, their backs bent under the weight of exhaustion, now stood straighter than they had in weeks. Their boots were still caked with grime, their faces streaked with dirt, but the spark in their eyes had returned. The gold, sitting there in trays and pans under the bright worklights, seemed to burn away every ache in their bodies. The rain, which had been falling steadily for most of the day, no longer mattered. The cold wind blowing in from the tree line didn't bite quite as hard. They were grinning like kids on Christmas morning, some even laughing so hard they had to steady themselves against the wash plant. Others swore under their breath, the kind of sharp, involuntary exclamations that happen when the impossible suddenly becomes real. A few simply stood there, silent, staring at the glittering piles, still trying to process the reality that they'd struck something this big. Dave moved through them slowly, his boots splashing in shallow puddles, stopping to clasp each man's hand with both of his own. "You earned this," he told them over and over, making eye contact with each one. It wasn't the gold that made this moment heavy. It was knowing how much had been endured to get here. That night, as darkness closed in and the generators hummed, the camp transformed. Music drifted from a small speaker someone had propped up on an overturned bucket. The scent of fresh-caught salmon cooking over an open flame cut through the usual mix of diesel and wet earth. Stories were told, voices carrying into the night, laughter punctuated by the occasional metallic clink of someone idly turning a nugget over in their hands. The air felt different now, lighter but electric, as though the entire operation had shifted into a higher gear. It was hard to believe that just a month earlier, the same camp had been teetering on the edge of collapse. A sudden flash flood had ripped through the lower cut, sending a surge of brown, debris-choked water racing toward the machinery. The crew had scrambled to move what they could, but one excavator was nearly swallowed in silt before they dragged it free, with two others working in tandem. That wasn't the only blow. Fuel shortages had left them hauling heavy diesel drums across miles of ankle-deep muck by hand, a miserable, back-breaking task that stole hours from the digging. Then came the wash plant failures, twice in the same month. Each breakdown cost them days, precious time slipping away while the season's clock kept ticking. Morale had been cracking, though nobody wanted to say it aloud. Some workers, in quiet moments away from the others, admitted they had been a day or two away from packing it in. The relentless grind of the job, the constant setbacks, and the creeping fear that they'd gambled an entire season for nothing had taken its toll. Even Dave, though he never showed it, had been carrying the weight of those doubts. That was the backdrop against which this strike landed. A season that had been circling the drain, now saved by a single discovery. It didn't just change the numbers, it rewrote the story of the entire year. What had been shaping up to be a tale of disappointment and loss was suddenly on track to become one of the most profitable and talked about operations in recent Alaskan mining memory. What made it all the more remarkable was how close it had come to never happening at all. The gold lay in a patch of ground most had dismissed without a second glance. Against the advice of multiple crew chiefs, Dave had ordered samples taken from the site, a low-lying, swampy stretch that looked more like moose territory than pay dirt. On paper, it made no sense. Poor drainage, unstable footing, no obvious signs of ancient river channels where gold might have settled. But Dave wasn't working from paper. He was working from instinct. Years of walking claims, reading landscapes, and picking up on the subtle signals others missed had led him to trust his gut above all else. He'd noticed faint traces of quartz in the rock outcrops along the edge of the swamp, a subtle but telling sign. The soil there had a strange coloration, darker, richer in certain layers, that didn't match the surrounding ground. To him, those were whispers of something hidden. And if there was gold here, it would be in a place where no one else had bothered to dig. He told his team exactly that, and though skepticism rippled through the camp, they followed orders. The first bucket came up heavy. The second was heavier still. By the third, even the most doubtful of the crew had fallen silent, eyes locked on the sluice as gold began to roll out in quantities none of them had seen all season. From that moment, any talk of worthless ground vanished. Dave's call had turned a forgotten, disregarded stretch of muck into the crown jewel of their operation. His reputation for trusting his instincts, already solid, was now carved into the bedrock of their respect for him. What had once been a risk was now proof that sometimes the most unlikely ground holds the greatest rewards. And for this crew, it was a reminder that in the unpredictable, punishing world of gold mining, fortune doesn't just favor the bold, it demands them. That truth was hammered home when the assays came back, numbers so high they bordered on unbelievable. Typical Alaskan placer gold might run respectable, but what Dave Turin's crew was pulling out of this stretch of ground tested in a league of its own. Some nuggets came in nearly untouched by the usual impurities, almost pure enough to be set straight into jewelry without a refinery's touch. Others, while smaller, had a glittering fineness that promised a steady yield even after the big chunks were gone. Coarse nuggets the size of marbles and fine flour gold, caught in the sluice riffles, blended into a rhythm of consistent profit that would keep the operation humming for weeks. When they held the largest pieces in their hands, it was as if they'd been rolled in a jeweler's tumbler, edges softened, surfaces gleaming like polished treasure from a royal vault. Word of the extraordinary purity didn't stay confined to camp for long. Collectors, gem dealers, and even museum buyers began making discreet inquiries, hoping to get their hands on a specimen that wasn't just gold. It was art forged by nature, but Alaska, in all its untamed beauty, has a way of making sure no miner forgets who's in charge. In this wild pocket of the state, the sky could shift from blazing sun to freezing sleet in a matter of minutes, turning the ground underfoot into either choking dust or slick, sucking mud. Grizzly bears roamed the tree line, massive silhouettes in the fading light, their presence a constant reminder that this was shared ground. The crew kept rifles within arm's reach and posted guards through the night, not just for two-legged threats, but for the ones with claws and teeth. When the rains came, they came hard. Roads became impassable swamps, swallowing truck tires and loader treads until heavy equipment sat stranded like abandoned relics. And then there were the insects. Clouds of them, thick enough to turn the air into a living curtain. They got into eyes, ears, and mouths until miners pulled on netted hoods just to breathe without gagging on flies. Every ounce of gold that left the ground was bought with an unspoken toll. Scraped knuckles, blistered hands, frozen joints, and the kind of exhaustion that seeps deep into a person's bones. As the piles of pay dirt grew and whispers of the gold's purity began to spread beyond the immediate circle, other eyes turned toward the claim. First came the locals, the ones who knew the terrain and the rumors that circulated through the back channels of Alaska's mining community. They started showing up at the edges, not crossing the invisible boundary, but getting close enough to see the lay of the land. Then came the outsiders, men with unfamiliar trucks, maps tucked under their arms, and a practiced casualness in their questions. Some didn't even bother showing up in person. Drones began buzzing overhead, their tiny cameras catching wide shots of wash plants, stockpiles, and access routes. It wasn't paranoia. Dave's crew had the footage. The response was swift and silent. Motion sensor cameras went up along the perimeter, catching every flicker of movement in the underbrush. Guards rotated on shifts through the night, keeping a constant watch on the gates and the gold storage. But in mining, the threat doesn't always come with boots on the ground. Rumors spread that certain claim jumpers weren't looking to sneak in under cover of darkness, but to find their opening in court. A loophole in the paperwork, a flaw in the filing date, anything that could turn weeks of backbreaking labor into a legal handover. Dave made it clear in one short, public statement. If anyone wanted this land, they'd have to look him in the eye and tell him to his face. In Alaska's wilds, where fortune and ruin often share the same bed, that wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge that echoed beyond the mining circles and into the local economy. Fuel companies were suddenly seeing orders far beyond their usual supply runs. Dave's operation became a consistent high-volume customer, paying in cash and often in advance to secure delivery in Alaska's unpredictable supply chain. This wasn't just a windfall for his crew. It was an unexpected economic jolt for every local supplier within driving or flying distance. Hardware stores found themselves stripped bare of replacement parts, industrial tools, and even the most basic mining supplies. Items that had sat on shelves for months were now being bought in bulk, often faster than they could be restocked. In the surrounding towns, temporary job listings began appearing overnight. Mechanics were needed to keep the heavy machinery running under punishing workloads. Drivers were hired to haul equipment, fuel, and food up the winding, rough-cut roads to the mining site. Cooks were brought into camp kitchens to keep dozens of hungry workers fed from dawn until well past nightfall. For many, it was short-term work, but in a place where seasonal jobs could mean the difference between staying afloat or packing up for good, Dave's gold strike was a welcome lifeline. Word spread quickly, and it wasn't just workers who came. Small towns on the outskirts of Dave's claim began seeing an influx of prospectors, hobbyists, and flat-out dreamers. Some arrived with panning kits and a few days' worth of food, hoping lightning might strike twice. Others came just to say they'd been there, to stand near the claim making headlines around the nation. Property owners nearby caught on fast, leasing small plots of land to would-be explorers for hefty fees, knowing full well that most would turn up only flakes, if anything. Still, the atmosphere was electric. Talk of a mini-rush filled the diners, supply shops, and bar counters. It didn't take long before the story leapt beyond Alaska's borders. Gold-focused blogs and niche mining news outlets were the first to pick it up, framing Dave's find as a once-in-a-lifetime jackpot. Within days, headlines appeared in mainstream publications, each more sensational than the last. Phrases like Alaska's $8 million strike and modern gold rush legend plastered across screens and papers alike. The imagery was irresistible. Rugged men hauling gleaming nuggets from the wild frontier as if time had rewound to the days of the Klondike. Then came the footage, clips showing Dave's crew lifting massive dirt-caked gold pieces from the pay dirt, spread across YouTube and Facebook in a viral wave. Each shot was more tantalizing than the last, showing gold in raw, untouched form. Proof that the find wasn't just rumor. Fans from every corner of the mining world flooded comment sections with congratulations, theories, and demands for the next update. Some even began speculating on the size of the unmined deposit, tossing out numbers that made the original $8 million seem small. Major TV crews weren't far behind. Calls poured into Dave's team from production companies offering exclusive filming rights for the next big extraction. They wanted full access, drone shots over the claim, interviews with the crew, even real-time coverage of the sorting process. For a man who'd spent most of his career in front of the camera, Dave knew how valuable that kind of exposure could be, both for his operation and for securing future investment. The name, the $8 million miracle of Alaska's wilds, caught on quickly, cementing the strike in mining folklore. And yet, Dave's attention was already shifting forward. In interviews, he chose his words carefully, never overselling the present, but always hinting at what might come next. He described the $8 million haul as the tip of the iceberg, and to those who knew the game, that wasn't an exaggeration. Geological surveys suggested the pay layer could extend far deeper than the team had reached so far. If that proved true, the real fortune was still locked underground. plans were drawn up almost immediately to expand the dig area. Engineers began mapping out how to push operations further into the surrounding ground without overextending manpower or equipment. The logistics were daunting. The terrain was remote, the weather unpredictable, and the costs staggering. But Dave's crew had momentum on their side. Every member knew the risks, but they also knew the rewards could dwarf anything they'd pulled from the earth so far. Profits from the first haul weren't being pocketed. They were being poured right back into the operation. More powerful excavators, advanced screening systems, and improved water management equipment were ordered. The camp itself was being reinforced to handle longer seasons with better insulation, storage facilities, and accommodations for the growing team. In the gold game, standing still meant falling behind, and Dave had no intention of letting this strike fade into a one-season story. Meanwhile, whispers of an even richer deposit kept morale high. Prospectors who'd seen decades of booms and busts began muttering that Dave's claim might be sitting atop one of the most significant finds in recent Alaskan history. It wasn't just about the gold anymore. It was about the legacy. To hit $8 million in one season was staggering, but to double or triple that in the seasons ahead. That would rewrite the modern playbook of placer mining. Dave himself summed it up in one of his rare, unguarded moments. "We came here for gold, but we may have just found history." In the camp, that line became something of a rallying cry. Men worked longer shifts, crews tightened their coordination, and even the harsh wind and endless mud seemed less of a burden when the promise of history-making gold hung in the air. Out here, in the unforgiving Alaskan wilds, there was no guarantee of tomorrow's yield, but there was a certainty that everyone on site was part of something far bigger than a single jackpot. And if this strike lit a fire in your imagination, hit that like button, share the story with fellow adventurers, and subscribe for more untold gold rush legends straight from the wilds. The next big discovery might be even bigger, and you won't want to miss it.